every man has a story. So I want to tell you the story of one man. This guy was born the third son to a family in New York, didn't have much money. And in fact, he was not planned, he was a mistake. And he heard that over and over as he was growing up. So he was born into this family, no money, a lot of desperation. The parents were not getting along. The dad was desperately trying to make a living, had a couple jobs. Now the mom was home with three boys in a small apartment in the Bronx. Their relationship was rocky. They weren't having much of a sexual relationship. He was cheating. She was angry and lonely. And so this was the environment that this boy was brought into. Eventually they moved. And a few years later, the father died of pancreatic cancer. And he was 43, and at the time, the boy was 9 years old. They had a funeral, and at the funeral, she didn't cry for her husband. She was too angry. And the boy saw that, and so he didn't cry either. So both of them never grieved the death of the father. In fact, she was so angry that at this funeral, and it was a veteran's funeral, she left the ashes and the flag behind and all memories of the father. And they got in a car and they moved west. They moved to a place where no one knew they were going. In fact, she cut the family off from the father's side of the family. It was years before they even knew where they had gone to. So they was cut off. They moved to Arizona. From age 9 to the time he got out of high school, he lived in a house where the living room was filled with those big yellow Mayflower moving boxes. They were never unpacked. So for 9 years, he lived in a house where he never really moved in. And it was really symbolic of the mom's journey. She had never moved on, and she had never moved in. And so this boy never had a sense of place, never had a sense of family. There was no joy in the house. The mom was working all the time to try to make ends meet. She was never available for his sporting events and other school activities. And he would eat his dinner alone on a TV tray in his room, watching his black and white television. And that's sort of the memory that he had of being in that house. The mom was angry and emotionally unavailable. And so he spent most of his days trying to keep busy, but the one thing he never had was a father or a father figure. The mom never remarried. She never dated. And so he was left to just fend for himself. He could never do enough. For instance, he would come home with A's on his report card, and the mother would say, why not an A+? And there might have been some humor and sarcasm behind it, but the messages that kept coming over and over again was that you're not enough, you're not enough. You're not enough to make me happy, you're not enough, right? And this was one of the messages that he grew up. So the thing is, what happens to a kid like that? So, you know, he started to have major depressive episodes when he was a teenager, never felt as if he fit in, didn't feel like a part of a family, so always felt uncomfortable when in the midst of other families, right? Didn't know joy, couldn't bring joy. People on the outside would have not known this because he was very good at presenting himself. Everything was fine. This is one of the coping skills that kids learn. But the truth was, he always felt like he was on the outside looking in. He didn't belong. And because of those messages that he received, no matter what he did, it was never enough. It was never enough. And so what happens to a boy who grows up with these messages? A man like that has a lot of unresolved issues. And some of you men can relate to this, and some of you women are with men, and you've seen this. He has unresolved issues around men because of his unresolved issues around his dad. He has issues that he deals with around women because of his angry and emotionally unavailable mother. He has self-esteem issues, and he still feels like he's not good enough no matter what he does. He compares himself everywhere at every opportunity and always falls short. And worst of all, because he never experienced joy when he was a kid, he has trouble experiencing joy as an adult. So this particular guy, when he was 33, luckily for him, he was introduced to a circle of men. Men who were also trying to be better men and who wanted to make themselves available to help each other to become better men. And so the really good news was that when I met that circle, I finally began to grow up, I finally began to heal, and I began that journey to let go of all those bad messages that I had heard at the feet of my mother all those years, and so that I could become someone who can then help other men. So from that first circle that I was introduced to back 17, 18 years ago, I began to learn about me, and I began to learn about all men, because we all are very much alike. The details may be different. The kind of experience at youth might be different. Men experience loss, trauma, abuse, substance abuse. They see drunk parents. There's physical abuse, sexual abuse. For one reason or another, many men did not have the fathers or the fathering that they needed or that they wanted. And so because of that, although they've managed to cope, survive, and in many cases thrive, beneath it all is an undeveloped sense of their own masculinity. They're not comfortable in their own skins around being a man because they haven't had that influence, that example of what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be a good man. So what I do, besides talking way too much at the front end and not having enough time to do the rest, I set up Better Men Coaching to help men to become the best men, fathers, and husbands that they can be. And when we do that work, it affects everyone. It affects marriages, it affects the kids, it affects their relationships with their aging parents. It makes them more accessible, more compassionate, so they can be and do just what they want. And it usually turns out that the men that they want to be are the same fathers that their kids need, and they're the same husbands that their wives want. But they have to do it for themselves. And it's difficult for men to come to this work, but when they do, which is usually at the other end of a clobbering, you know, their wives tell them this is it, last chance, go get some help or we're done. It usually comes as a result of a crisis or an imminent crisis, but the best time for men to come is when they just realize that things could be better. They could be happier. They could be more successful. They could feel more joy. They just don't know how to do it. Back in over 100 years ago, the boys used to be raised by the men. The men taught them their trade, taught them how to behave in their community. Their brothers and uncles and the other fathers and the men in the community helped them through difficult situations. With the Industrial Revolution, the men went away, and the women started raising the boys. And we don't think much about this because it's been several generations now. But what we have now are men who haven't had enough masculinity in their lives. They haven't had enough of the example of what it means to be a man because they're mostly around women. Their mothers, teachers in elementary school. And so one of the important things that we do, which we're trying to bring back, is the importance of men having other men in their lives. And so it's been generations now, so men don't know what they don't know. They don't understand they're missing something that they've never seen before. And so all we're doing is building these circles, these environments, where men can get that support once again. So you may not have been fathered the way you needed to when you were a kid, but it's not too late to get that fathering. And what we do amongst the men, first with me individually, in our groups, in our retreats, is that we father one another. And we could start that healing process. And it's not the panacea. It doesn't solve all the ills, but it's an important step for men that is oftentimes completely disregarded. And once the men get what they need in that room, then they're free to seek out help elsewhere and do everything else that they need to do to be the best fathers and husbands that they can be. So at Better Men Coaching, I do work with men individually, and through the trust that we build with the men, I do couples work with lots of sons of the men I work with and help them to be to bring up those good men. We have groups in Agora, and I also work with men on the phone, groups and individually, because there are a lot of men who need the help, who don't have support in their local areas. So I thank you for listening. And do we question or do we move on? And I could take a couple questions. Thank you.
As a mother of 2 sons, I absolutely agree with what you're doing, because I noticed that until I got my son into Boy Scouts and fathers on my sons, I noticed there was a huge need and a difference for that. So I applaud what you're doing.
Yes, in order to become the best man you can be, you have to be in the company of other men. Women cannot teach men to be the men that they can be. Women can teach men a lot of things. And women, the heads are nodding, you can only do so much even for your husbands. You could see what needs to be done, but they cannot accept your direction. But when it comes from another man, it's remarkable how many phone calls I get. I'll say, these funny phone calls. She'll call and say, I've been telling him this for 10 years, and he sits with you for an hour and he gets it? So they're happy and pissed at the same time. Thank you very much.